At Delchamps, we stay open all day and all night.
The prices are great, and I'm in and out. It's very...
The new A&P with more new stores.
Do you ever think about those grocery stores? The familiar, comforting places that vanished without a trace? These forgotten chains shaped how we shopped, ate, and spent weekends with our families, aisle after aisle. What happened to the places we once knew so well, and why does no one talk about them now? This one hurts. A&P was not just a grocery store. It was the grocery store. Founded in the 1800s, it was once the largest retailer in the United States. You could find them everywhere, with thousands of locations that stretched coast to coast. They had their own branded coffee, house label canned goods, and that iconic red and white storefront sign that felt like a stamp of reliability. A&P was where you got your Thanksgiving turkey, your back-to-school lunch snacks, your Sunday pot roast ingredients. And for a while, it seemed unstoppable. But over the decades, competition started closing in. Big box stores, discount chains, and regional players chipped away at A&P's dominance. Their model did not evolve fast enough, and people started going elsewhere. Store after store closed. By the time they filed for bankruptcy, not once, but twice, it felt like watching a legend fade in slow motion. The final shutdown in 2015 marked the end of a retail empire. A&P just disappeared from the map. No farewell tour, no grand goodbye, just shuttered doors and dust-covered shelves. If you grew up shopping there, you probably still remember the smell of the produce aisle, the creaky carts, and those old green stamps. And now, it is all gone, like it was never even there. For a lot of families in the West, Lucky was the go-to store. It was big, clean, well-stocked, and, well, Lucky. You knew the logo the second you saw it. Bold red letters, no frills. Lucky was all about value without shouting about it. You could walk in, grab what you needed, and be out the door in under 15 minutes. No weird aisle layouts, no endless upselling, just groceries. And that is what made it so popular. In its prime, Lucky had hundreds of stores across California and neighboring states. It was the neighborhood spot, the place your parents sent you with a list and a few dollars. But then Albertsons came knocking. They bought Lucky out in the late 1990s and started rebranding everything. One by one, the Lucky signs came down. The name disappeared. Some stores stayed open, but the brand was gone. Albertsons thought it would be a seamless switch, but for longtime customers, it felt like erasing a memory. The name Lucky made a brief comeback years later, but it was not the same. Just a borrowed name without the spirit. If you ever carried a paper bag with the Lucky logo on it, you know what kind of place it was. Simple, dependable. And now, a ghost in grocery history. Alpha Beta had one of the catchiest slogans of its time. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor. And for a while, people did. This was the store with the alphabetically organized aisles. Yep, you heard that right. They actually tried to organize food in alphabetical order. Was it practical? Not really. Was it memorable? Absolutely. Alpha Beta was the kind of place that felt futuristic in the 1960s and 1970s. Sleek designs, big signage, and a vibe that made grocery shopping feel almost fun. You would walk in and see the whole week's meals laid out in order, or at least that is what it felt like. Parents liked the prices, kids liked the bakery samples, but behind the scenes, things were starting to crumble. Ownership changed hands. The brand bounced between corporations until it landed in the lap of Yucaipa companies, the same folks who merged it into Ralph's and Food 4 Less. Slowly, the Alpha Beta name vanished. By the late 1990s, it was basically extinct. Some old stores kept the layout. A few signs lasted a bit longer than they should have. But the name was gone. Just another store turned memory. And if you ever saw that old green and orange sign, you know exactly how weirdly charming it all was. If you lived in the Chicago area, Dominick's was practically family. It was not just a grocery store, it was your store. Founded in 1918 by Dominick DiMatteo, it grew from a family-run corner shop into a powerhouse chain that dotted neighborhoods across the city. The stores had that distinct red and white signage and a layout that always felt intuitive. You walked in and you knew exactly where to find the best deli deals or which aisle had the fresh bread. For years, Dominick's was about local flavor, Italian ingredients, regional products, a sense of place. Then Safeway came along. They bought Dominick's in the late 1990s and tried to turn it into something it wasn't. Uniform branding, new suppliers, national product lines. It lost its Chicago soul. Customers noticed, sales dropped, and in 2013, Safeway made it official. They were shutting it down. All of it. The entire chain. Just like that, Dominick's was gone. A staple of city life, wiped out in one corporate decision. Today, some of those old buildings still stand empty or repurposed. But if you ever bought your Sunday sauce ingredients at Dominick's, you feel the absence every time you pass one. Waldbaum's was a New York classic. If you know, you know. It started as a single store in Brooklyn way back in 1904 and grew into a beloved regional chain, especially across Long Island and the boroughs. Walking into a Waldbaum's felt like entering a true neighborhood store. The produce was stacked high, the fish counter was loud, and there was always that one employee who knew your mom by name. They had their own bakery, their own coffee, their own sense of rhythm. Waldbaum's was not flashy, but it was familiar, and that was the magic. But behind the scenes, things got messy. Ahold, the Dutch parent company of Stop and Shop, took over, and things started changing fast. Stores were remodeled, employees were shuffled, and the heart of Waldbaum's got lost in the shuffle. By the time bankruptcy hit in the mid-2010s, it was over. The chain collapsed, stores closed, and just like that, a New York institution was gone. People still talk about it. They remember the smell of the bakery and the weekly circulars that showed up in the mailbox like clockwork. Now, all that is left is memory, and maybe an old reusable bag buried in someone's garage. Red Owl was one of those stores that just felt classic. The name, the owl logo, even the storefronts had a kind of charm that you do not see anymore. It started in the Midwest and quickly became a staple across states like Minnesota and Wisconsin. The design was simple: bold colors, clean aisles, and friendly workers who actually said hi when you walked in. You could grab your milk, your meat, and a copy of the local paper all in one trip. For years, Red Owl thrived. It was dependable. Small enough to feel local, big enough to feel modern. But like many chains, it could not outrun the tidal wave of national brands and discount superstores. By the late 1980s, most Red Owl locations had been sold off or rebranded under new names. The final nail came when SuperValue phased out the brand entirely. Stores were stripped of the owl, signs came down, and neighborhoods lost something special. Red Owl disappeared so quietly that some people still do not know it is gone. But if you ever stood in a checkout line with that little red owl smiling back at you from your grocery bag, you remember, and you miss it. Grand Union was a strange mix of luxury and down-to-earth utility. One part grocery store, one part time capsule. At its peak, Grand Union had hundreds of stores, mainly in the Northeast. You could find one nestled between a laundromat and a video rental shop, a real slice of suburban life. They were clean, quiet, weirdly sophisticated for a neighborhood chain. Their in-store branding was sharp, dark tones, modern fonts, minimalist signage. It made your weekly shopping feel a little fancy. Grand Union was not flashy, but it had a loyal customer base. People trusted it. But behind the clean aisles and good service, the company was falling apart. Mismanagement, competition, multiple bankruptcies. Every attempt at a comeback just fell flat. By the early 2000s, Grand Union was bought, sold, and eventually dismantled for parts. The last few locations were converted into other stores, and the name disappeared. No farewell ad, no thanks for the memories. Just silence. If you ever clipped a Grand Union coupon or grabbed dinner rolls from their bakery, you probably feel like a piece of your hometown vanished. Because, well, it did. This one is a bit of a double feature. Food Fair started in the 1930s and built itself into one of the largest grocery chains in America. It was a big deal. Then came the 1970s and the rebrand. Food Fair became Pantry Pride. New signs, new look, but the same stores underneath. Pantry Pride exploded across the country, buying up smaller chains and expanding into new markets. It looked like a grocery empire in the making, but they overreached. Fast. By the 1980s, the cracks were showing. Stores felt outdated. Competition was getting fierce. And when Ronald Perlman used Pantry Pride to help finance a takeover of Revlon, it drained the company. Yes, a makeup brand helped take down a grocery chain. After that, the stores were sold off, closed down, or rebranded. No more Food Fair. No more Pantry Pride. Just a trail of abandoned storefronts and fading signs. If you remember seeing those blocky red letters above the entrance, you know just how fast a grocery giant can vanish. Colonial stores had one of the most charming logos ever. A little rooster perched on a basket. It was Southern grocery pride at its finest. Operating mostly in the Southeast, Colonial was clean, friendly, and community-centered. You went there for your staples, your Sunday roast, your after-church snacks. Then in the 1970s, it morphed into Big Star. Same chain, new name. The rebranding felt bold. Shiny red letters, sleek store layouts, a little more polish, and it worked. For a while. But like so many others, Big Star could not keep up with the changing grocery landscape. Mergers, competition, and economic shifts slowly chipped away at its footprint. One by one, the stores were bought out or closed. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Big Star was fading fast. Some became Harris Teeter, others got picked up by Kroger. But that old school charm? Gone. You will not find a Big Star logo anywhere today. But if you ever walked those clean, bright aisles with your mom or grabbed a candy bar at checkout, the memory sticks with you. It was the kind of store that knew its customers, and we lost that. Down in the Deep South, Delchamps was king. Started in Mobile, Alabama in the 1920s, this family-owned chain grew steadily across the Gulf Coast. It was classy, local, personal. The kind of place where your neighbor worked the bakery counter and your cousin bagged groceries. Delchamps had gleaming white floors, polite staff, and an energy that made grocery shopping feel like a community event. They carried regional products you could not get anywhere else. Jambalaya mixes, Cajun seasonings, fresh shrimp straight off the boat. But then Winn-Dixie came along. They bought out Delchamps in the late 1990s and started rebranding everything. Within a few years, the Delchamps name disappeared. Stores closed or converted. The family legacy was erased in record time. People were upset. Loyal customers felt blindsided. And just like that, one of the most beloved Southern grocery chains was history. If you grew up near the Gulf, you still hear the name Delchamps and feel a pang. It was more than a store. It was part of the neighborhood. And now, it is part of the past. If you lived in Alabama or anywhere in the Deep South, you probably remember Bruno's. It was more than just a supermarket. It was a Southern institution. Family-run and deeply rooted in Birmingham, Bruno's grew into one of the largest independent grocery chains in the region. Their stores were clean, well-stocked, and had that unmistakable Southern courtesy. You got your groceries bagged with a smile. Some even helped carry your bags to the car. They were ahead of their time with store brands, deli counters, and bakery setups that felt closer to a family gathering than a corporate chain. But behind the scenes, things began to unravel. A tragic plane crash in 1991 took the lives of several company executives, and from there, it was a slow decline. Leadership shifted, competition ramped up, and eventually Bruno's filed for bankruptcy. The chain bounced between different owners before being completely phased out. One by one, the signs came down. And just like that, Bruno's was gone. For locals, it felt like losing part of the neighborhood. You knew your butcher. You chatted with the cashier. It was familiar, comfortable. And now there is barely a trace, just a memory tied to shopping carts and warm greetings. Furr's might be better known for its cafeterias, but back in the day, their supermarkets were just as memorable. Based in Texas and New Mexico, Furr's supermarkets were a staple for Southwestern shoppers. You could grab everything from fresh produce to tortillas made in-house, and maybe even a few tamales on the way out. The stores had a charm: bright tile floors, handwritten sale signs, and employees who actually talked to you like you mattered. They were not flashy, but they were steady. And they were everywhere. Furr's grew steadily through the mid-20th century, branching into regional grocery dominance. But by the 1990s, cracks started forming. Larger national chains moved in, costs went up, sales dropped. Furr's tried to hang on, but the competition was brutal. Bankruptcy followed, then closures. Today, you might find an old Furr's building repurposed into a thrift store or left completely abandoned. The signs are long gone, but the memories stick. Grabbing sodas after school, waiting in line with your grandparents, or just hearing the familiar ding of the front doorbell. Furr's supermarkets may be gone, but if you grew up in West Texas, you probably still say the name without thinking. Eagle Food Centers were the pride of small-town Midwest grocery shopping. Founded in Illinois, these stores had a loyal following in rural communities where choices were limited, but expectations were high. People trusted Eagle. They stocked quality meat, fresh produce, and offered real deals, not just flashy signage. The aisles were wide, the music was soft, and the feeling was personal. It was not rare to bump into someone you knew every time you went. For a while, Eagle Food Centers expanded rapidly, stretching into Iowa and Indiana. But then came the 1990s. National competitors started muscling in with better tech, lower prices, and glossier branding. Eagle struggled to keep up. Attempts to modernize came too late, and after a series of ownership changes, they filed for bankruptcy in 2003. Most stores closed quickly, and the ones that remained were either bought out or faded into local lore. What was left behind were empty lots and loyal customers left wondering what happened. For people in those communities, Eagle was more than a grocery store. It was a reliable routine, part of the week's rhythm. And when it vanished, something local and human went with it. First National Stores, or Finast as most people remember it, was one of those chains that quietly served millions without ever becoming flashy. They started in the Northeast and expanded throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic, quietly building a reputation for solid prices and trustworthy products. The name Finast actually came from the abbreviation of First National Stores, and you would see it in blocky letters on the front of modest buildings with green awnings and zero pretense. It was no-frills grocery shopping, but it worked. They sold everything you needed, nothing you did not, and they did it consistently. Then corporate reshuffling began. Finast was eventually acquired by Ahold, which also owned Giant and Stop and Shop. Slowly, the name Finast started to disappear. Stores were rebranded, remodeled, and absorbed into the larger chains. The green signs came down. The name faded. And suddenly, no one was saying Finast anymore. It was like it never existed. But if you ever pushed a squeaky cart through one of their aisles or clipped coupons from their weekend flyers, you know the truth. Finast mattered. It was there, quietly supporting families week after week. And then, without ceremony, it was gone. Mayfair Supermarkets was a cornerstone of New Jersey grocery life, and under the Food Town name, it had an unmistakable hometown feel. These stores were everywhere, tucked between barbershops, next to local diners, and always packed on Sunday mornings. You knew the layout, you knew the butcher, and you always knew which aisle had the cookie samples. Food Town was not trying to be glamorous. It just wanted to be there, reliable, comfortable, local. But during the 1990s, as bigger chains moved in with glossier shelves and deeper pockets, Food Town started slipping. Mayfair Supermarkets, which ran the largest group of Food Town stores, filed for bankruptcy in 1997. A scandal involving missing funds only made things worse. Stores were sold off, others shut down. By the time the dust settled, most of the original Mayfair-run Food Towns were gone. A few food towns still exist today under independent ownership, but the original network is a shell of what it once was. If you grew up in Central Jersey, you probably still call the nearest grocery store Food Town, even if it changed names a decade ago. That is how deep the brand ran. For shoppers in Arkansas and parts of Louisiana, Harvest Foods was a name you trusted. It was your no-frills neighborhood supermarket. Easy to get in, easy to get out. Clean floors, familiar faces, and prices that made sense. They focused on real groceries, not gimmicks. No weird loyalty apps or complicated deals, just solid weekly sales and a decent selection of everything you needed. Harvest Foods had its moment in the 1980s and 1990s. The branding was bright and simple, and for a lot of people, it became the place to grab everything from meat to margarine. But the grocery business is brutal. Bigger players moved in, regional chains pushed harder, and Harvest Foods started shrinking. A buyout attempt in the late 1990s only accelerated the decline. By the early 2000s, the stores started disappearing, either being converted or shuttered completely. Today, barely a trace remains. Just faded memories of bright aisles, handwritten sales signs, and maybe an old plastic Harvest Foods bag tucked in the back of someone's kitchen drawer. It is the kind of store that slipped away slowly and left quietly. Handy Andy was a Chicago area original, and for a while it was booming. These were big, clean stores with wide aisles and an early focus on customer convenience, a rarity at the time. They offered a mix of national brands and private label goods, and their weekly circulars were a staple in local newspapers. If your mom clipped coupons in the 1980s, odds are at least half of them were for Handy Andy. They had a loyal customer base and kept prices competitive. Then came the push to expand too fast. Handy Andy bought up too many locations in too short a time. The quality dropped. The management lost control. And in the early 1990s, Handy Andy filed for bankruptcy. Dozens of stores closed overnight. Shoppers were stunned. Employees were blindsided. Today, most people in Chicago still remember Handy Andy, even if they haven't seen one in decades. It had that perfect blend of price and familiarity. And when it disappeared, it felt like the city lost one of its own. Lucky 7 was never the biggest chain, but for those who shopped there, it was something special. These small, often independently operated stores dotted rural towns and inner-city neighborhoods, offering essentials at prices that felt honest. No big ad campaigns, no jingles, just the number 7, a bold red sign, and a reputation for stretching every dollar. You might not have found specialty cheese or 5 brands of bottled water, but you got what you needed. And you left satisfied. Lucky 7 made its mark in the 1970s and 1980s, especially in communities that larger chains ignored. But time was not kind. Larger competitors bought up real estate, undercut pricing, and slowly pushed Lucky 7 out. Most closed quietly. Some changed names and tried to hang on, but the brand never bounced back. By the early 2000s, the signs were all but gone. But people still remember walking in with $5 and walking out with dinner. It was humble grocery shopping, and that was the charm. Yes, Kroger is still around, but the family center? That was a different beast. These were massive combination stores that carried both groceries and general merchandise. Think early prototype for what Walmart supercenters would later become. In the 1970s, Kroger rolled them out in select markets, hoping to be a one-stop shop for everything: food, clothes, garden tools, all under one roof. For a while, it was revolutionary. But the format had issues. The stores were too big, too expensive to run, and often too scattered in layout. Customers got overwhelmed, and then Walmart and Target came in with better versions of the same idea. By the mid-1980s, Kroger quietly phased out the family center name. Some were rebranded, others were closed or sold off. Today, it is just a footnote in Kroger's long history. But for those who remember shopping there as kids, wandering from the cereal aisle to the toy section, it was something different, and in its own way, kind of magical. Hannaford is still a name in New England, but what it used to be, that version is long gone. Before its acquisition by Ahold Delhaize in the early 2000s, Hannaford Food and Drug was fiercely local. Stores were independently operated with deep community ties. They carried regional products, sourced locally, and had that unmistakable down-to-earth vibe. The baker knew your name. The cashier asked about your grandparents. And the store manager might have lived down the street. They expanded smartly throughout the 1990s, building clean, bright stores that felt both fresh and familiar. But after the buyout, things started to shift. Product lines changed. Staff turned over. And while the name remained, the soul of Hannaford began to blur with its corporate siblings. Ahold Delhaize kept the logo but smoothed out the personality. For longtime shoppers, it was like watching your best friend slowly turn into a stranger. If you remember the old Hannaford, the real one, you know exactly what was lost. Food Barn might not have had the polish of bigger chains, but for Midwestern families, it was all they needed. And then some. It was simple, direct, honest. You went to Food Barn to get in and get out with enough groceries for the week, maybe even with a little change left over. The branding was modest, big white letters on a red sign, no frills inside or out. And yet it worked. You could find fresh meat, affordable produce, and a dry goods aisle that somehow carried everything. The name Food Barn fit perfectly. It felt like a place built by locals for locals, the kind of store where a handwritten sales sign had more trust than a digital coupon. But by the late 1980s and early 1990s, times were changing. Big box competitors moved in, offering more choices, more square footage, and more modern convenience. Food Barn struggled to keep pace. Mergers and acquisitions followed, but none managed to save the brand. Eventually, the name disappeared entirely, swallowed up by regional giants or replaced with chains that had flashier names but less character. For people who shopped there, Food Barn was never about branding. It was about trust. If your mom told you to grab dinner ingredients from Food Barn, you did not ask questions. You knew you would find what you needed without the noise. Now it is gone. No tribute, no relaunch, just another name we quietly lost along the way. If you grew up around Des Moines, you knew Dahl's. This Iowa-based grocery chain was a local legend, and for decades, it was the gold standard for full-service supermarkets in the region. Dahl's prided itself on clean stores, friendly service, and a bakery that locals swore made the best donuts in the state. It was not a flashy chain, but it was personal. You knew your cashier. You saw your neighbors. And during the holidays, it felt more like a gathering place than a store. They were early adopters of in-store pharmacies, full-service delis, and even had a few shops that were open 24 hours, back when that still felt revolutionary. People did not just shop there, they trusted Dahl's. But eventually, that loyalty was not enough. Larger national chains moved in with deeper pockets and cheaper prices. Dahl's tried to compete, but financial strain piled up. In 2014, they filed for bankruptcy. Stores were sold off to other retailers like Hy-Vee and Price Chopper. The signage came down, the aisles changed, but the memories stayed. Ask anyone from Central Iowa, and they will probably tell you their first job was at Dahl's, or that they remember their mom dragging them through the aisles every Sunday afternoon. It was a different kind of store, one that felt like part of the town, not just part of your errand list. And now it is another name you will not see again, except in memory. Smitty's Big Town was exactly what it sounded like, big, bold, and built for everyone in the neighborhood. It was part supermarket, part department store, and part community hangout. These massive stores were early pioneers of the supercenter model, blending groceries with electronics, clothing, and even furniture long before the Walmart era took off. Based in Arizona and other parts of the Southwest, Smitty's had a huge footprint and a loyal customer base. People came for groceries but stayed to browse the record section or test out recliners near the back wall. It was the one-stop shop before that term even became popular. Smitty's had energy. You felt it as soon as you walked through the doors. The low buzz of checkout lanes, the music playing overhead, and the constant announcements over the intercom. The carts were bigger, the parking lots were packed, and the deals actually worth the trip. But as the retail landscape shifted, Smitty's struggled to keep up. Big box competition, rising costs, and a changing market forced the chain into a merger with Smith's Food and Drug in the late 1990s. After that, the Smitty's name was slowly retired. Stores were rebranded, layouts were changed, and the unique vibe was lost. For a generation of shoppers, Smitty's was the place where weekly errands turned into mini adventures. Now it is just another ghost of retail past, big in spirit, gone without warning. White Front was bold, not just in design, but in ambition. With huge white facades and massive arching entryways, it looked more like a sports arena than a discount store. But inside? Groceries, clothing, appliances, and everything in between. It started in Los Angeles and quickly expanded up and down the West Coast. Shoppers were drawn in by the scale and the savings, plus the parking lots were so big they felt like airport runways. The logo was simple, red text stamped onto an all-white backdrop. It popped. White Front was one of the original hybrid shopping experiences, offering both a supermarket and a department store under one roof. And it thrived for a while. But behind that giant storefront, cracks were forming. Expansion happened too fast. Profits started falling. And competition with rising chains like Kmart and Target was brutal. By the mid-1970s, the once mighty chain was shuttering stores left and right. Within a few years, it was all gone. No more bold arches, no more red and white branding, no more everything under one roof before it was trendy. Today, most people barely remember White Front. But if you ever got dragged there as a kid or saw the building glow in the distance on a hot California afternoon, you remember. It felt big, it felt special. And now it is nothing more than a faded photo and a few scattered memories. National Tea was one of the quiet giants, a store with a name that sounds more like a shipping line than a grocery chain, but trust me, it was everywhere. Founded in the early 1900s, it once had over 600 stores scattered across the Midwest and South. You did not go to National Tea for glitz. You went because it had what you needed, and because your parents always went there. It had that no-nonsense meat and potatoes kind of energy. The logo was plain, the buildings were square. But inside, reliable shelves, clean floors, and decent prices. It felt local, even though it was big, and that is what made it work. But like many regional chains, National Tea struggled as bigger players started flooding the market with larger stores and lower margins. Ownership changed hands a few times, and eventually, it was absorbed into SuperValu. The name vanished. Signs came down. Stores were rebranded, sold off, or closed. And now it is hard to find anyone under the age of 40 who even remembers the name. But if you do, chances are it brings back memories of pushing a metal cart down narrow aisles, waiting for your turn at the meat counter, and flipping through the weekly ad your dad kept folded in his back pocket. National Tea may not have had flash, but it had history. And like so many others, it disappeared without a sound. The dairy farm drive-thru felt like something out of a storybook. You did not get out of the car. You just rolled forward slowly on a gravel path that crunched under the tires like popcorn, while the smell of hay and cream filled the air. Wooden signs pointed the way. Milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes fresh butter today. Dad would pull up to the window, nod at the farmhand, and exchange a couple of glass bottles like they were precious cargo. You could hear them clinking together softly in the metal crate behind the seat, already cold with condensation. If you had been on your best behavior, meaning no backseat bickering and no complaints during the wait, he would ask the real question, "You want a cone?" It was always a yes. The scoop was big, the cone was soggy by the time you were halfway through, and somehow it still tasted like heaven. Sometimes Dad would get one too and say, "Best $2 I ever spent." And as the cows in the distance mooed lazily and the sun painted gold across the field, you realized simple things could feel grand. But if you think that was charming, just wait until you step inside the used bookstore that sold both dusty novels and ham radios whispering from across the country. And for a while in the 1980s, Yoplait custard-style yogurt was the gold standard of dairy indulgence. It was the grown-up snack for moms on the go, for teenagers trying to feel fancy, for anyone who wanted their yogurt to feel special. But then came the health craze. Suddenly, thick meant fattening. Creamy meant guilty. Greek yogurt showed up and changed everything. It was tart. It was authentic. It was better for you, or so we were told. Yoplait tried to pivot, but the custard line got pushed to the back. Eventually, it disappeared altogether. Quietly, like melting dessert. For those who remember, it is a sore spot. The yogurt aisle today is a battlefield of trends and promises, but none of them feel like that little custard cup. Yoplait custard style was indulgent without apology, and maybe that is what killed it. Or maybe we just forgot how to enjoy something simple and rich without feeling bad about it. Strawbridge and Clothier was not just a store, it was Philadelphia royalty. When you walked through its grand doors, you felt like you were stepping into a chapter of history. Everything from the marbled floors to the stately columns whispered of another era. It was refinement without arrogance, tradition without snobbery. In the 70s, it managed the impossible, holding on to old-world charm while adapting to suburban sprawl. The stores outside the city had just as much grace as the flagship downtown. Strawbridge and Clothier was a place where school uniforms were bought, wedding gifts were chosen, and Christmas shopping became a ritual. Salespeople wore suits. Packaging was elegant. It was an experience, not just a transaction. But time caught up, and slowly, that air of dignity was replaced by the hum of sameness. Mergers, rebrands, closures. And one day, you looked around and realized the grand old name was nowhere to be found. What happens when we lose the places that taught us how to carry ourselves? Before the controversy caught up with it, Sambo's was everywhere. And for a time in the 1970s, it was one of the biggest names in breakfast. Open early, often late, and always ready with a stack of pancakes dripping in syrup. It was the kind of place families stopped at on the way to road trips or for Saturday mornings that started a little too early. The vibe was laid back, kid-friendly, and comfortable. Bright booths, illustrated menus, and pancakes that somehow tasted better when eaten with plastic syrup containers shaped like bears. The food was affordable, the service was fast, and the portions were just shy of excessive, which is exactly what breakfast lovers wanted. Their branding leaned hard on storytelling, and while the original theme is undeniably problematic today, it reflected a different time when restaurants leaned into mascots and backstories to create an identity. But for a lot of kids back then, it was just the place where they got chocolate chip pancakes and a chocolate milk with a swirly straw. And the thing is, the food held its own. The pancakes were genuinely good. The eggs were reliable. The hash browns were crispy, and the coffee was hot, which is all anyone really asks of a breakfast joint. At its peak, Sambo's was not just a restaurant. It was part of the morning routine for countless families, the kind of place you returned to because it felt like a tradition. And while its legacy is a complicated one, there is no denying that for a few years in the 1970s, Sambo's helped define what going out for breakfast looked like across America. Plymouth was never the flashiest name on the road, but it was trusted, reliable, American. It was the car your uncle fixed up in the driveway, the station wagon that took families to the Grand Canyon, the compact that young drivers learned to parallel park with. In the 1970s, Plymouth had already seen better days, but there was still hope. Then the market shifted. Gas prices spiked, Japanese imports hit harder and faster than anyone expected, and Plymouth's offerings started to feel outdated. Chrysler focused its attention elsewhere. Dodge got the performance, Chrysler got the luxury, and Plymouth got what was left. People still bought them, but it felt like settling. You were not proud to drive a Plymouth. You were just glad it still ran. Sales dipped. Innovation stalled. Even iconic models like the Duster could not save the brand. The writing was on the wall. By the 1990s, Plymouth was a forgotten middle child, unloved and unnecessary. In 2001, Chrysler officially pulled the plug. For decades, Plymouth had been a quiet part of the American story. And now, it is a footnote. But the memories remain. in faded photos, old commercials, and the sound of an engine that will not come back. The miniature golf course with homemade obstacles was never part of a chain. It was part of someone's backyard that got out of hand. The fence leaned, the AstroTurf peeled at the corners, and the scorecards were photocopies from sometime around 1967. But to Dad, this was sacred ground. "Watch out for the windmill," he would say, pointing to a lopsided contraption that spun more out of habit than engineering. Hole 6 had a dinosaur, once green, now a sad grayish blue with a missing eye, and Hole 9 was uphill into what looked like a mailbox from a sci-fi movie. Dad kept score with one of those tiny pencils, sometimes generous, sometimes forgetting that penalty stroke. He cheered every shot like you had just qualified for a Masters tournament, and when he sunk a hole in one, he would raise his hands like he had won a trophy. The best part? Ice cream sandwiches at the end, slightly melted from the cooler behind the counter. You never asked for anything more. But if the ground game was that magical, just wait until you went airborne, watching planes take off from a sleepy little airport that felt like your own private runway. You never bought morning funnies for the taste. You bought it for the box. Bright yellow, covered in classic comic strips like Dennis the Menace and Beetle Bailey, it turned breakfast into a Sunday paper. The idea was genius. Distract kids long enough to get some sugar into them before school. And for a hot second in the late 1980s, it worked. Kids tore into those boxes for the comics, not the cereal. Because the cereal, it was nothing special. Too sweet, a little stale, shapes that promised fun but delivered mush. Still, the box made it worth it. Parents bought it because it kept the table quiet. Kids kept it because it felt like reading instead of eating. But novelty has an expiration date. Once the comics were rereads, the excitement faded. And when people realized they did not actually like what was inside, morning funnies quietly disappeared. Ralston had tried to package joy and forgot to put flavor in the bowl. It was not the worst cereal ever made. It was just all surface. And in a world where cereal is comfort, that was not enough. Morning funnies taught us a hard lesson. You can smile on the outside and still be empty inside. Rich's was more than just a store to Atlanta. It was the city's beating heart during the holidays. Every year, crowds would gather beneath the flickering lights of the department store's enormous Christmas tree, hoisted high atop its downtown roof. There was a magic to it. As snow machines pumped flakes into southern skies, you could feel the hum of shared wonder. Rich's brought families together at the Pink Pig monorail, through its iconic Magnolia Room tea room, or just under the warm glow of its holiday windows. But even outside of December, Rich's held weight. It was where Southern charm met civic pride. The salespeople knew your name. The clerks would wrap gifts with care and tie the bows just right. Kids bought their first suits there. Brides picked out silver, and everything, from linens to love letters, was laced with a quiet dignity. When the store was absorbed into Macy's in the early 2000s, something unspoken disappeared with it. Not just the building, not just the brand. A piece of Atlanta's soul faded into memory. When did convenience become more important than tradition? There is something about a root beer float that feels like summer. But when you had one served in a frosty mug at an A&W Drive-In, it hit different. This was not a rushed soda from a plastic bottle. This was root beer as an experience. Car hops on roller skates, trays clipped to your window, and that perfect mix of ice cream and fizz. It was Americana in a glass. In the 1970s, drive-in dining was still alive and kicking. And A&W was at the heart of it. Families packed into cars, kids crammed into back seats, and there was this weird, wonderful thrill about eating full meals without leaving your vehicle. You were in your own little booth on wheels, and the star of that menu was always the float. That thick foam, that creamy scoop slowly melting into sweet carbonation. You did not sip it. You savored it. You poked at it with your straw. You took a spoon to it when the bubbles died down. It was simple, delicious, and a reminder that not everything needed to be complicated to feel special. The food was classic drive-in fare: burgers, hot dogs, crinkle-cut fries. But it was the root beer that made the place unforgettable. Cold, rich, and served in chilled glass mugs that clinked like they meant business. No paper cups here. Just the real thing, sweating with condensation under the summer sun. It was not fast food. It was drive-in dining with personality. And in a decade where sitting down often meant sitting inside, A&W gave people a reason to roll down their windows and enjoy a meal under the open sky. Esprit was not just fashion. It was a feeling. Youthful, bright, alive. The brand captured a moment when clothes were not just about style, but about saying something. About the world, about identity, about freedom. In the 1970s and 1980s, Esprit exploded across America. Their catalogs were works of art. Their stores were full of color and energy. It felt like the future. You walked into Esprit and felt like the main character in your own story. It was clothes for the bold, not just the fashionable. But fashion moves fast. By the 1990s, trends were changing. Grunge came in, minimalism followed, and Esprit's cheerful aesthetic felt out of place. Management changed. Expansion overreached. And what once felt vibrant, now felt dated. Sales dipped. Stores closed. By the early 2000s, Esprit in the United States was nearly extinct. It survived in Europe and Asia for a while longer, but the magic had faded. For a certain generation, Esprit was the brand they wore to school dances, to mall hangouts, to first dates. It was more than fabric. It was memory, stitched into every sleeve. Now it is a whisper from a closet that no longer opens. Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. Peanut butter fans thought they had found heaven. PB Max was chunky, messy, and unapologetically loud. A thick slab of peanut butter on a cookie base, all drenched in milk chocolate. It had all the makings of a legend. And for a short while in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was just that. You would see it in gas stations, in vending machines, in your friend's lunch. It stood out from the crowd. It tasted like rebellion. But then, like a cruel trick, PB Max disappeared. People wrote letters, sent complaints, asked where it went. The answer? Mars executives apparently just did not like peanut butter. That was it. That was the reason. The product was successful, profitable, and beloved. But it did not match the personal taste of the family behind the company. So they pulled the plug, just like that. No announcement, no farewell tour, just silence. It is the kind of decision that makes you realize how fragile even your favorites are. PB Max did not fail because people stopped loving it. It failed because someone decided it did not deserve to exist. And in that, there is something deeply upsetting. A snack that won hearts, but not boardrooms. Caldor was quiet confidence, a discount store with taste. It never screamed at you with neon signs or carnival-like sales. Instead, it offered value in a calm, dignified way. Walk through the doors, and everything felt in order. The layout was smart, the prices were fair, the brands surprisingly good. For families in the Northeast, Caldor was the go-to for almost everything. You could buy a warm winter coat and matching mittens, pick up light bulbs, and browse the electronics aisle. all without fighting through chaos. Caldor was where fathers bought toolkits they actually used, and mothers found tasteful decor that did not cost a paycheck. Kids loved the toy aisle, bright, clean, and just adventurous enough. The clerks knew the regulars. You could ask questions and get real answers. It felt like shopping for adults, honest and efficient. But then came the tidal wave. Big box superstores with deeper discounts and endless inventory. Walmart, Target, the giants. And slowly, Caldor's calm faded under pressure. Budgets tightened, shelves thinned, and eventually the chain folded. The sign came down, the lights turned off, and the neighborhoods it served were left with louder, colder options. Caldor may not have had a catchphrase or a commercial jingle, but it had heart. And that was more than enough. Why does dignity always seem to lose in the age of excess? Now let us cool things down a little and talk about Swensen's. Just saying the name might make you crave something sweet. Swensen's was not just an ice cream shop, it was an event. Bright colors, vintage vibes, and menus that looked more like storybooks than food listings. Every Sunday had a name, and every name came with a little magic. It was the place you went after Little League games, family dinners, or just because it was Tuesday and you wanted a treat. Swensen's had that old-fashioned charm, but never felt out of date. Maybe it was the way the whipped cream swirled just right, or the cherry perched perfectly on top. But whatever it was, it worked. Banana splits, hot fudge sundaes, ice cream sodas. They were not trying to be healthy. They were trying to be happy. And it showed. Each visit felt like a reward. A place where kids could feel like royalty for a few minutes, and adults could remember what it felt like to just enjoy dessert without guilt or green juice. And you better believe the staff leaned into the theme. Uniforms, big smiles, the whole 9 yards. It was not fast food. It was ice cream theater. Every scoop was a little show and everyone left smiling. There are fewer Swensen's around today, but their memory is still scooped into our minds. They were more than a sweet stop. They were a reason to leave the house. In a time when entertainment did not come from a screen in your pocket, Swensen's gave you a reason to look up, order something colorful, and just enjoy the moment. Woolco was supposed to be the next evolution of Woolworth's. It had the size of a department store and the soul of a 5 and dime. Launched in the 1960s and booming into the 1970s, Woolco promised everything in one place: clothes, toys, appliances, groceries. For families used to making a dozen different stops, it felt like magic. A bright red sign that said you could get it all without going broke. But behind that promise was chaos. Poor inventory systems, outdated layouts, stores too big to manage and too cluttered to navigate. And then came the competition. Kmart, Target, Walmart. Retail giants with cleaner shelves, sharper prices, and better supply chains. Woolco could not keep up. It became the store you only visited when you had to. The store where the lights buzzed too loud and the shelves were always half empty. By the 1980s, most Woolcos had either been shut down or sold off. Some were turned into malls, others just disappeared. And with them went a small piece of how we used to shop, wandering the aisles on Saturday mornings, dreaming about toys, picking out socks with Mom. Woolco was not perfect, but it was familiar, and we miss it more than we admit. The strip mall pet store did not smell like adventure. It smelled like wood shavings and fish food. But when Dad said, "Let's stop in for a minute," you knew it meant 20. The walls were lined with glass tanks full of turtles, frogs, and fish that looked too bright to be real. You would press your nose against the glass and point. "That one. I want that one." Dad would shake his head and smile. "We're not getting a turtle." 5 minutes later, you were holding a goldfish in a plastic bag, trying not to spill it on the seat of the car. He was not a pushover. He just knew the power of a memory. And that pet store, as humble as it was, felt like a mini zoo to you. There was always one sleepy lizard under a heat lamp and a parrot that squawked like a broken doorbell. Sometimes you would hear, "Hey there," from across the room and realize the bird was mocking you. Dad would strike up a conversation with the guy behind the counter like they were old war buddies, swapping advice on filters and food pellets. You would head home with a tank, a packet of food, and a new responsibility you were not quite ready for. And when you were ready for something outdoorsy, Dad knew just the place, with canoes and no life jackets in sight. It was not just dessert, it was dinner backup. The chocolate chip Snackin cake was a box mix from Betty Crocker that promised an all-in-one solution. Just add water, stir, and bake. What came out was a rich, moist cake dotted with chocolate chips, perfectly sized for kids coming home hungry. It was a staple of after-school snacking. You did not need frosting. You did not need effort. Just a pan and an oven and 30 minutes. Moms loved it. Kids devoured it. And for a time in the 1980s, it felt like this little secret weapon in the pantry. But times changed. Cake mixes lost their allure. Pre-packaged snacks took over. Microwavable treats and pre-sliced desserts made the humble Snackin cake look old-fashioned. It quietly disappeared from shelves. People did not even notice at first, but when they did, it hurt. It felt like losing a family tradition you never meant to abandon. The kind of snack that was made, not bought. A little slice of normal that told you everything was okay. Chocolate chip Snackin cake is gone. But the memory of warm kitchens and crumbs on napkins, that still lingers. Cain Sloan was a Nashville original, unpolished, dependable, and quietly refined. It stood tall downtown, watching the city grow up around it. It was not flashy, but it never needed to be. This was where you bought your first prom dress or your best church suit. The wooden floors creaked with history, and the staff treated you like a neighbor, not a number. It felt local because it was. Cain Sloan hired local, spoke local, knew the rhythm of the community. You could spend an afternoon there, not even buying a thing, and still feel like you belonged. Whether it was record players, kitchenware, or perfume, the store carried the kind of dignity that never goes out of style. But like too many others, it was bought, merged, and eventually erased, this time by Dillard's. The transition was quiet. A change in signs, a shift in tone. And before anyone had time to mourn, Cain Sloan became another name on a list of stores that used to matter. What happens to a city's spirit when all its cornerstones are turned to stone? Farrell's was not quiet. In fact, it was deliberately loud. Sirens, drums, shouting waiters announcing someone's birthday like they had just won the lottery. It was sensory overload in the most delightful way. And kids loved every second of it. If you ever had a party at Farrell's in the 1970s, congratulations, you peaked early. Walking into Farrell's ice cream parlor felt like entering a cartoon version of the turn-of-the-century soda shop. Striped vests, bow ties, old-timey music, and a menu filled with wild desserts that were taller than your little brother. It was chaos with sprinkles. This was the kind of place that turned Sundays into stadium events and made sugar feel like a celebration. And then there was the zoo, a ridiculous, absurd, absolutely brilliant monstrosity of a Sunday. Carried out by multiple employees running through the restaurant while banging a drum and screaming, "Zoo! Zoo! Zoo!" It was basically a declaration of war on restraint. And the kids? They were eating it up, literally and figuratively. But underneath all the whipped cream and pageantry was a place that really understood family fun. You were not just ordering dessert. You were making a memory. The chaos, the clatter, the calorie overload, it was part of the magic. You did not come to Farrell's for peace and quiet. You came for a food parade, a sugar rush, and a place where the adults sighed while the kids bounced in their seats. It was the ultimate yes place in a world full of no. Olympia beer was not flashy. It was not exotic. It was the working man's brew. Born in Washington State and famous for its "It is the water" slogan, Olympia carved out a loyal base across the Pacific Northwest. It tasted like fishing trips, union picnics, and back porch summers. You did not drink it to impress anyone. You drank it because it was yours. But the beer wars were brutal. Big national brands like Budweiser and Miller came swinging with huge ad budgets and coast-to-coast reach. Olympia tried to expand, but its regional charm did not scale well. The further it traveled from the rivers and forests of its home, the more it lost its soul. What made it special could not be bottled and shipped across state lines. It was bought out, reformulated, stripped of its identity. By the 1980s, the writing was on the wall. The original brewery closed, the taste changed, and loyal drinkers quietly moved on. Today, Olympia still exists in name, brewed by a different company in a different place. But those who remember the real thing will tell you, it is not the same. And maybe it never could be. If one of these forgotten grocery stores brought back a memory you did not know you still had, tell us your favorite aisle moment in the comments. Give this video a like you are scanning it at checkout, and hit subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane.